We made this.
Engage!
Tea Earl Grey, hot.
There are times, sir, when men of good conscience cannot blindly follow orders. What we leave behind is not as important as how we live.
I'm Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Federation Starship Enterprise. Make it so.
Hello and welcome back everyone to Make It So, a Star Trek Picard podcast for the We Made This podcast network. I'm your host today, Tony Black, and I am joined this week by a brand new guest to discuss episode 8 of Star Trek Picard, Broken Pieces. With me is, for the second week in a row actually, a Scotsman, Lee Hutchison. How are you?
Yeah, good. I feel that it was very appropriate for a Scotsman to be on this episode, so it's kind of worked out by a nice quirk of fate.
Yeah, it has actually, yeah. as we will discuss. My co-host Kurt, he's away, and if anyone is on the Facebook Make It So group, you'll see that he put up a post asking for people's suggestions as to where he is, because over the last few weeks he's been variously on missions with the going after the Tal Shiar, he's been with Section 31, he's been on holiday on Riser. So we had a few interesting discussions, and I promised I'd pick one actually in terms of where Kurt is this week still. I'm going to go with Oz Trekkie's suggestion that Kurt right now is in the Bajoran wormhole. So then he can be everywhere or anywhere all at once. So he could be right with us right now. But yeah, some fun discussions there, some fun suggestions there, guys. And I might steal a few more for future weeks. But yeah, so in this episode, as I say, we're going to talk about Broken Pieces. But before we do, when we get a new guest on the show, we always start by asking them really what they are thinking right now of the entire run of Star Trek Picard. Obviously, you know, you've got form in Trek podcast world, Lee. You've been on Trek FM quite a lot in the past. You co-hosted the Star Trek Next Generation podcast for a while, Earl Grey. So you know your Star Trek. So you're well placed to have a judgment on whether or not Star Trek Picard Season 1 is working, for you at least, or not. So where are you standing right now?
I suppose it's kind of tricky to really give such a strong opinion either way at the moment, because I suppose we're 2 hours short. Like, we're not even in the middle anymore. We're on the cusp of this story kind of wrapping up and coming to an end, and I'm really enjoying elements of it. Some parts of it frustrate me. Elements of it I'm like really excited to see where this is going to go, and my ultimate opinion will sort of be shake out in the next sort of 2 hours. You know, overall I'm pretty happy with it at the moment. It's been really exciting to kind of go back into that world, and since sort of 2002 when Star Trek Nemesis came out, you know, we've only ever seen sort of the briefest glimpses of sort of the Alpha Quadrant, Beta Quadrant, the state of play there in sort of Voyager, and then in Star Trek 2009. And you know, in that time we've had prequels, we've had prequel movies, prequel TV series, prequel Star Trek shorts. So I've been really excited to kind of, on a fan level, see where this universe is after all these kind of years on, and it's been really exciting to see what that state of play is, and that's been really rewarding to me as a fan on a kind of personal level. But as a kind of viewer, I've been really happy with it. I think it's been strong performances, and I think it's the same as any first season. It's got its highs and its lows, but the thing is that it's got my attention. It's got me coming back in again to a second season, and whether that has been earned by the show itself, if I was a general audience member, it's hard to say. I've been a Star Trek fan for about nearly 3 decades, so it's hard to say if I'm predisposed to be watching it regardless of quality. So yeah, it's hard to give such a strong answer, because I wish I could go, I'll get back to you in 2 weeks with a full kind of breakdown, but just now I'm pleasantly happy and hopeful for the final run.
Well, when Kurt and I do like a roundup episode, which we'll do at the end, and we look back on the whole first season, well, I dare say we'll have like a little thread where we get people's opinions. So you'll have to put a little comment in, and just we can read that out as to what you thought about, you know, the season by the time we get to the end, because you're absolutely right. It is, because it's such a, and I dare say we'll talk a bit about this in terms of this episode, but because it is such a serialized one long story, you know, 10 episodes of the season, it is going to be hard to judge it completely as a piece until we get to the end of the season finale. So yeah, I can see what you mean, and I'd say, you know, by and large I agree. It's had its good points and its bad points, but I have enjoyed it, and I continue to enjoy it really. And I think that kind of sums up this episode in many ways. I think that Broken Pieces is a little bit up and down sometimes in some places, I'd say. So yeah, let's talk about it. Broken Pieces is the 8th episode of Star Trek Picard, first aired on March the 12th, 2020, was written by Michael Chabon, the showrunner of the season, and I think it might be the first episode he's written solo, and directed by Maya Vivilio. I'll probably mispronounce that, to be honest. So, and in this episode, it continues the story after the adventure on Nepenthe. Now, Picard and Soji are on the La Sirena. They are heading for Soji's mysterious home, sort of android planet. Rios is having a breakdown. Raffi's trying to sort him out, and on the cube, Seven's back, and all hell is breaking loose. So it's very much an episode bringing everything together, really. So out of 10 then, Lee, I mean, if we were to give this a ranking and generally what you thought of the episode, where would you place it?
I suppose it's another one where it's tricky to rank these episodes. I suppose when you think of like Next Generation, even sort of the most serialized Trek, Deep Space Nine, things felt very self-contained in an episode, and you could come away and confidently go, that is an 8 out of 10 episode, and you could confidently say that. And with kind of this more serialized Star Trek, to this extent that they've done with Discovery and now Picard, I kind of feel like, yeah, this is a really good episode. I would rate it this high, but I have to kind of put a little prefix next to it of like, but it's not the full picture. There's still some things to go which may enhance the episode. I mean, I when I watched it earlier this week, I would have given it maybe about a 6. A fine episode. I'm kind of ready for the next 2. But then sort of a repeat this morning when it dropped onto Amazon, I would have kind of bumped it up to a more stronger 7. I think, I'm sure we'll dive into this. There's elements that when I watched it the first time, I thought, yeah, this is a lot of setup for what's to come. And that seems to be kind of the state of play with Picard is, we kind of go along with a few episodes and adventures, we pause, we set up for the next few, dive in, and I felt that very much was going to be my impression on the first episode of my first watch of this episode. But then on the repeat viewing, there were so many things that I really took away, and I think this has got a really genuine kind of Star Trek feel at the core of it, and I'm kind of excited to dive into it.
I would say I agree about around 7 out of 10, to be honest. I think it's along similar lines, I suppose, as an episode like The Impossible Box, which 2 episodes sort of started to really kick the arc story into gear and lay a lot of the extra pieces down. The Broken Pieces kind of pays a lot of things off in many ways. It is a culmination of a lot of the plot lines that have been running for the previous 7 episodes. And I think it's interesting how they've chosen from a structural point of view for the season to have the majority of the big revelations sort of land just before the 2-part finale, and not maybe the thinking being that they are going to leave the finale fairly streamlined to be more of an action adventure sort of based last couple of episodes and get a lot of the exposition backstory answering out of the way. I think Broken Pieces probably clarifies and answers more things in this one episode than we've seen so far at all. And it kind of works on that level to clear the decks. I feel that there is a bit of an inherent problem in the way this works, in that I think Michael Chabon delivers one of the better scripts, actually, of the season. I think some of the dialogue in this is a cut above some of what we've seen before. But I think the trade-off is that it struggled for me at times to be truly compelling drama, as opposed to being interesting backstory and, revelatory and putting a lot of these pieces into context and, with things like the Jat Vash and Rios's backstory and things like that, which have been answers we've been looking for since the beginning. But I felt that it fell into a bit of a mystery box trap in that by nature it had to sort of spend an episode explaining everything, and not even to the point of the whole show don't tell maxim, which people might accuse this of, but also being very much based on a lot of backstory conversations which aren't being driven by a lot of character driven action. And I think there is sometimes a problem with that. I think the better mystery box storytelling manages to juggle both. and manages to do a compelling story where the characters are actually driving the action while also finding a way to reveal all these little bits and pieces. And I think this feels almost like Picard stopping and going, right, this is everything. This is what this all means. This is how it all connects up. Now we can have all the action venture and all the you know, presumably Borg cubes and Romulan fleets and all this kind of thing. So for me, that was the mixed bag element on a narrative point of view.
That was my... I don't know how many times you've watched it, Tony, and
Twice.
I don't say this...
Twice.
What I kind of felt with the second viewing is I had the same sort of feeling on my first watch, but then on the second, I kind of felt like this is Star Trek Next Generation in a way. Like, this felt very spam in a can. You know, we have got our sets, which are the Borg cube and Rios's ship, and then what we see is people talking through what the plot is, playing out their emotions. We sometimes think, you know, how many times did we think there's going to be a big action moment in the Next Generation? And I felt that was with the Borg. I was like, oh my god, 7 of 9 is about to activate these Borg and they're going to go on a rampage through the ship and killing Romulans. Oh no, they've just been ejected into space and so on. And I just felt like I was watching very traditional Star Trek, for better or worse, of just watching people talk on the sets. And, you know, I felt like we'd finally saw the Picard that we've been kind of trying to get to. You know, some people think when he says engage at the end of episode 3, well, that's him kind of back. But I just felt in the way he spoke with the characters, you know, engaged with them in such a kind of personal way, shared his experience, you know, so many of the conversations Picard has, I would be like, this is kind of what probably a lot of us maybe expected, like a Picard show of like, is Picard almost sharing that experience, that wisdom, that we're in the middle of a sort of coronavirus at the moment and we're lacking any sort of wisdom in the world, and here's this man that's just been able to share that, you know, looking at the good in the people, kind of reaffirming faith, talking about how much he admired some of his crew and loved them before. And I just thought, this makes me quite happy to watch. And yeah, there's nothing much perhaps going on. There's a lot of talking at people, but I suppose that's always been Star Trek, and maybe I've been conditioned to accept that.
No, you make a really good point there, and I think you're right, definitely, in terms of many of the Picard moments. I think the two best scenes of the episode are his middle sort of conversation with Soji, where they talk about data and things like that, and the final conversation with Rios, which are very much TNG style. Let's spend a good few minutes just talking, you know, and talking things out, which was really good, and I thought they were really well written and well performed. And Picard, you're right, Picard did feel like the man we knew, and you know, I really liked the previous episode for similar reasons. That felt very Next Generation to me, not just because you know, Riker and Deanna were back, but also that it was taking a breath and it was stopping. I think the difference with this one is that whereas with Nepenthe it was intentionally taking a character-based breath on this beautiful world with people, you know, almost like a rest stop. In this episode, they are moving towards a destination. There is a lot of narrative and, you know, story going on around them, but I didn't necessarily feel like there was enough narrative impetus alongside all of the things that we were learning. And I think it didn't quite get that balance right. And that's part of the problem. I think I no doubt we'll talk about this in the roundup episode. But part of the problem I feel I've had with this season is that it doesn't always know how to integrate these two styles of storytelling, to the point that it's part of the reason I don't really think a mystery box format necessarily fits Star Trek, or this kind of Star Trek. You know, I have the same argument with Discovery, as I've said before, in that I feel like Star Trek is always at its best, like you've just said, when it gets to stop and analyse and think and discuss. And there have been some parts of Picard that have done that, and have done that really nicely. And there are parts of that in this episode. But I feel that it's trying to serve two masters. But having said that, I think I'd give me this kind of stuff and some of the richness that's in this episode any day over some of the earlier scenes on like the Borg cube earlier in the season, which were really weak, you know, for various different reasons. So yeah, it's while on the one hand I have my issues, I do see the goodness in this, and I completely get where you're coming from in terms of the Star Trek style moments.
I think there's one thing I would throw in on that as well, is that there's a third Picard kind of conversation, and it's that one with Jurati as well. Jurati has, he's speaking to someone that has committed a crime. I'm sure we can all debate kind of the motivations and so on behind that. But it was quite fascinating to kind of watch that interaction. And there's a little moment I loved as well when Jurati poses to Picard, like, do you believe in hell? And, we very rarely have those discussions about heaven and hell and religion in sort of The Next Generation or with the character of Picard, maybe apart from, say, Devil's Due. And it's just that little look that Picard gives, that scientist, so dismissive at the concept of hell. And it was just that this is a person that is potentially could face life imprisonment. It's all unfolding in front of him. But how he meets that character and goes with her and tries to understand what happened with her. And, he goes in a way that he would often maybe not do as a captain. He asks her, this person wasn't just your professional colleague, this was maybe your lover as well, trying to understand what kind of went behind that. And that would not be something we would usually see Picard do, or be that kind of stage of intervention. So it was really exciting to see Picard in that as well. So I was so happy to get not one, not two, but three of these kind of Picard one-to-one moments with his new crew.
Yeah, I think they absolutely have helped this episode in many ways do some good character work within the context of it. Let's dig in then. Let's talk a little bit more specifically about Broken Pieces. So the episode begins, as has become like the house style of the season, with a flashback. And I've really enjoyed this little thing. I've enjoyed the fact we get a little bit of backstory and a little bit of a drip feed each episode of something. I think it's been a nice recurring theme throughout the season. And in this case, we have the backstory of the Zat Vash at long last. And we learn quite a lot in this opening prologue, set just before the Mars attack. It confirms the big theory as to the Romulans, or certainly this group within the Romulan Empire being behind the attack on Mars. That's the thing. One of the criticisms I've seen online since this episode came out is that people are saying, it was too obvious that the Romulans are behind it. But actually they're not, are they? It's not. This isn't the Romulans. This is a cult. This is a dangerous, fanatical sect within Romulan society and Vulcan society, because they're Romulans and Vulcans who have, with a lot of power, who've managed to pull this off, isn't it? So I don't know about you. I don't think it's fair to sort of blame the Romulans for this.
No, and do you know what? I hear some of these criticisms sometimes, and where it's, there's all this mystery and things going on. But I think also kind of Picard has been quite good at, it's only 10 episodes and not everything is going to be a mystery or a shock revelation. Sometimes it's like, I guess that makes sense and so on, where the Vat Vash were behind it, because we got that impression very early on. Even things like what they do with Soji is that, we kill the character off in the first episode, but we very much have the revelation about this character by the end of episode 1, and it kind of fits in with kind of Picard, of that they only do have so many episodes, so some things will be kind of posed as a mystery perhaps at the start of an episode, and will be addressed quite quickly, and it won't be sort of overstay its welcome, like say certain other shows, maybe like Discovery, where it'll be going, who's the Red Angel, who's the Red Angel, who's the Red Angel, what's this, or it's maybe learning from mistakes that things like, say, Star Wars has done recently in sort of their prequel trilogy of, like, you drag out something for 3 episodes, then you end up disappointing people. So I wasn't, when it was kind of like, it was all confirmed what we already knew, I was like, that's good. It was good storytelling, because you weren't like, God, there was a huge hole in that plot about why that happened. It was like, the writing made that make sense, and it was one of those things I didn't have an issue with personally. Yeah,
I think I get that. I think that it does make sense. I mean, it would have been one of those. Who else was going to be responsible for it? If you look at it from that perspective, because you'd set the Zat Vash up as the this bad guy group of the season without really knowing who they were for most of it, and there were theories that the Romulans would have been involved, even though there were people saying, well, why would the Romulans have sabotaged their own rescue effort and this kind of thing? But then it was, if you suddenly threw in a twist that it was a mad Klingon, it would have been like, well, hang on a minute, where does that come from? So, yeah, I agree. I think it fits in terms of the context of this, and it's the crucial thing is, it's not learning that the Zatvash have done this and it being a big shock. It's learning why. It's learning the context of why they, somehow, and we don't quite know how, they programmed the synths to turn on themselves and their masters, and as is discussed, create the conditions for the synth ban, because that was ultimately the goal, wasn't it? It wasn't really necessarily to destroy all the synths on Mars as much as it was stopping the Federation from even building them in the first place. So it had a bigger effect. It's an interesting context, isn't it? That it's based on a very ancient race who destroyed themselves through synthetic life on this world called Aya, the grief world, part of this artificial created 8 planetary star system from like 300,000 years ago. What do you think about that as a revelation? Do you feel that that's, because obviously a lot of people are now saying, oh, maybe it's the Turcone Empire and all these things that we've seen seeded in Star Trek before, but whoever it is or whatever we learn, do you think that's an interesting revelation, and is there a resonance as to that in terms of what they're trying to say about today?
For me, that element about there was this, it felt like sort of window dressing on the first watch I watched. I was like, okay, that's something, I guess, and it was sort of on the same as well. It wasn't something that particularly grabbed me in terms of, I'm sure there's some maybe deep dive to be had there, but I kind of watched and I thought, okay, yeah, sure, there might have been this, and that it kind of created some sort of distrust of sort of synthetics or empires, whatever, but I didn't feel that kind of particularly landed very well or left much of a strong impression. It'll be interesting to see if it's kind of played up in the remaining 2 hours.
Yeah, I suppose so. It's more about, like I say, giving that context, and I suppose seeing what effect it has on Narissa, who is. It's interesting, actually, because this episode is the first one to try and give her something more than a very one-dimensional sort of Game of Romulans, Cersei Lannister creepy vibe. All through. I mean, she for me has been one of the, despite how good Peyton List is actually in the role with what she's given, she has been one of the low points for me. Her and Narek are just awful characters. I found them incredibly one-dimensional. This at least tries to give some explanation as perhaps why she's so extreme and a little bit unhinged, even though she's more controlled unhinged than someone like Ramda, who obviously we find out is her aunt, who was also part of exploring the admonition, which is this ancient information left on Aya that gives them the visions of the ancient apocalypse and all this kind of thing involving synthetics. Narissa is the only one, a little bit like the end of Raids of the Lost Ark, where he survives the ghosts coming out the Ark. She's the only one who powers her way through this, and it doesn't destroy her. But is it kind of an explanation as to why she's so fanatical and a little bit sort of murderous and incestuous and crazy now, that she experienced this incredible sort of psychic, powerful vision?
I really liked that opening, to be honest, and it was one of those ones I've been, okay, they've had this element where they've kind of introduced that the Romulans have this distrust of synthetics, and I kind of went along with it. I was like, sure, if you're telling me this is the case, okay, fair enough. But with that opening, it felt really strong, and what I loved about it was that you truly saw people going absolutely kind of mad. And they're pulling at the hair, tearing at their skin. It was really quite a horrific image. And I like that Star Trek, even sort of in this kind of day and age, when it uses violence and graphic imagery, it is still very rare if used at all. And it can be divisive, but it certainly left an impact of like, wow, this certainly means business. And I just thought the whole direction, the writing, sort of watching kind of Narissa's kind of, steely resolve of sort of like being unaffected by it, I thought was really quite a fascinating scene. And it was one I kind of watched back a couple of times. I thought, I never picked up on my first watch, but then you see like a little flash of data as well, for example. I thought that was a really clever bit of editing, and I'm looking forward to, I'm sure, someone like Trek Core screen capping it so we could really dive into all the imagery that was going on there.
Yeah.
I noticed they had the planet exploding that had been used before in Star Trek Discovery as well, which was an interesting bit as well, so that even with all this huge budget, they're still reusing CGI effects.
That is classic Trek, though, isn't it? That's in the great tradition of that bird of prey that they filmed once exploding and was used in like about half a dozen films and TV shows back in the 90s. Yeah, it's great. It's great that you have that. I think the way that they filmed this, I agree. I thought it was a really striking opening. I really liked it. I thought the music was very good as well. One of the rare moments beyond like the intro music where Jeff Russo's music has really stood out to me as being quite spooky and compelling, actually, in terms of this. And it was just very good. It was very, very weird and creepy, and builds on the sort of flash images we saw Agnes have when O gives her that mind vision in the last episode. And the flash of Data obviously is fascinating. It is very much the suggestion that either Data could have become this, or in theory, what he was could have become the same kind of thing. But so it's very, very good, and even though I don't necessarily think it deepens Narissa as a character, it adds some interesting contexts, and I don't think anyone would have seen coming that Ramda was her aunt, and that she was like the steward of her and Narek. Although I think everyone sort of already had sort of figured out that she was the one who sort of messed up the Borg cube when she was assimilated on that Tal Shiar ship. So it's sort of, but it clarifies that as well, that, it's kind of, they assimilated this crazy woman who had this mad vision, and that, it sort of stuffed up the Borg, which is fascinating in itself, really.
I suppose that's been the big mystery, really, where I've been kind of waiting for that, like, what happened to this Borg cube? How did it get here? And, it was one of those ones, it was sort of just dropped there in sort of like a little sentence, and I was like, I can get that. Because of that, it all hinged on that sort of opening kind of prologue, and I think it really did deliver on it, and it made me go, wow, I would love to, I'm sure there'll be a book or a comic or something that will come out about this part of it, but I was really fascinated by, how that happened, and, it would have been so boring to go, oh, it was maybe like Unity or something like that, or it was, it was an alien attack, or maybe something in a nebula. It was like, no, this character's absolute grief managed to bring down a Borg cube. That's such a fascinating and interesting idea. Yeah, I agree. I like it. I like the way, I think tying her into that in that way is really interesting. Definitely. I think it was well done, and I think, like I say, it was something we'd sort of already sort of semi figured out, and that she probably, caused problems with the Borg cube. But on the Borg cube, obviously now we get Seven come back, don't we, as well? And this was something we knew was going to happen in the last episode when Elnor presses the SOS, and Narissa's trying to take him down with her guards and everything, and then Seven blasts her way in, gets a big hug from Elnor. And what have you made of Seven's return, really? I mean, she's obviously only been in one episode previously, Stardust City Rag, which we talked about a few episodes ago. And she has less to do in this episode. She's more of a part of the B plot, and I dare say she will factor in quite importantly into the finale in the last couple of episodes. But do you think she's been well utilised? Do you think that in this episode as well, do you think she's well utilised? Not so much here. I think very much when I watched the episode the first time, I thought, this is all kind of set up, kind of, as you say, clearing the deck for the next episode. Whereas I think on the kind of repeat viewing, it very much feels like that's where the 7 of 9 plot is going. We don't really go very much further with her and Elnor. Even sort of like, oh my god, they're going to like take back this Borg cube, and it becomes sort of, it's ended very quickly before it even starts. So it's like, okay, they're now, by the end of this episode, they've got the Borg cube. That's, it was dealt with very quickly. That's what's going to happen. And I think there'll be the payoff of that in the final 2 hours. So, I enjoyed her appearance in the Stardust Rag City. That was a really interesting kind of revelation about where she's gone. And again, I hate to sound boring, but it seems like they've learned from the mistakes of things like Star Wars, that, Picard, 7 of 9... 2 decades have passed since we've last seen them, and these characters are in very, very different places, that and you look at where they are now, and you feel like there's a journey's happened, and I'm excited to kind of see how that continues to unfold in the next 2 hours. I felt 7 of 9 had a pretty poor ending in sort of Voyager. That's a whole thing, and so I'm excited to see where this will kind of go, and it's the one sort of element of the kind of the finale that I can't quite picture what's going to happen and maybe where they're going to go, because I get the impression that the core credits cast, they will go off on their own adventures in season 2. There's the element of, does 7 of 9 make it? Where does 7 of 9 go? And I'm excited to see what that's going to be. So yeah, it's another one where it's like, get back to me in 2 weeks.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was surprised that Hugh of Borg was killed off, but we're talking about a different level of character with 7, and the fact that Jeri Ryan is still very clearly really good in the role. She looks fantastic. She's managed to avoid what happens to a lot of people who, and I was talking about this last week in context of how good Jonathan Frakes and Marina Sirtis were actually after so many years, but the context of not being able to gel with playing a character after such a long time. She's avoided that trap completely. Right from the beginning, you feel like this is 7 older. I feel like if anything, there are going to be cries for 7 to go off and have her own spin-off. Not necessarily think that will happen, but I'd be surprised if her story came to an end at the end of this. Whether we'll see her in a future season, I don't know, but I think Jeri Ryan is just too good an asset to let go at the end of this season, I suspect. But I mean, we don't know at this stage. I think she had with less to do in this episode. I think she was good. She didn't have there wasn't really anything in terms of character. Not like Stardust City Rag. She is more there for a functional aspect of really, I think, establishing the Borg cube as something that will be an ally later. I mean, because she's already, her and Elnor throughout this episode are basically trying to steal it and get it up and running and steal it. And for me, that's set up for potentially a 7-piloted Borg cube, of all things, coming to the rescue against a Romulan fleet in that 2-part finale. I mean, and I kind of think, if that's the way it goes, the amazing irony of Picard being saved by a Borg cube will be worth it all, actually. But we'll see. What did you think about how they utilised her with the Borg, obviously? Because obviously when we saw her in the first episode, in Stardust City Rag, we got the revelations about Icheb and about her old flame using, harvesting Borg parts. But beyond that, there wasn't a lot of Borg-centric stuff. But in this, she's literally hooked back up into the Borg collective, isn't she, briefly? So do you think that was an interesting way to use 7 in this episode?
I think that's I think we're gonna see probably more of that in the next 2 hours. They leave us on that tantalising. Annika has got more work to do. What that's going to be, I'm sure we'll find out on the next 2 Fridays. But I think the whole thing with the Borg this season, sort of from it wasn't, the Borg haven't been used the way I maybe anticipated. No. I don't really know what I expected, but the whole Borg cube has felt like the ultimate sort of Chekhov's gun that they've had sort of running through the season of like, what's going to happen with this cube? I remembered sort of originally thought it was going to be that green badges, like when it goes green, run. And I thought, oh my God, like they're going to do something at some point. And that's never kind of transpired. But it feels like this Borg cube, you don't introduce this huge cube, we see it regenerating. It's going to have some sort of impact in kind of the next 2 hours. I mean, we've kind of learned a little bit about the Borg, but nothing particularly too much. I think we've kind of been more focused on these XBs, and it feels sort of like it's not been sort of fully developed that much what's been kind of going on the Borg cube. It feels like it's sort of been more watching sort of a character drama take place in sort of the setting of a haunted house, really. So it's been a bit frustrating, perhaps, the Borg cube. As I say, I would have loved to have seen these Borg drones, come out of their alcoves and start to kind of, the music soar and kind of maybe taking out some Romulans. They've kind of frustrated me so far. So they've still got 2 hours to maybe pull back the Borg cube plot line being something that I really enjoyed and was rewarded by, than as opposed to being something like, okay, that was something that was a plot. Well,
yeah, and it feels like the Borg. I mean, given that all the Borg are ejected into space, or it feels like thousands of them are ejected into space, maybe even all of them on that cube. The Borg who hadn't been XB'd, deborged by Hugh's project. It could now be that the cube is empty, and maybe that's how they want it to be. Maybe they want it to just be empty so Seven and Elnor can sort of pilot it to the rescue. It's hard to say, really. But you're right, it would have been great to see Borgs, coming to the rescue, fighting these Romulans. I mean, it could have been a budgetary thing. Maybe they couldn't afford scenes like that. Maybe they wrote scenes like that and they couldn't afford them. I feel like there have possibly been points where they have maybe... I mean, a good example was how Bejazzle in Stardust City Rag was meant to be a Kazinti, and she was supposed to be fully CGI, and they had to cut that for financial reasons. So maybe like you say, they built these sets, and on the official Picard podcast, the production designer was talking about how they were amazed by how great the Borg cube set was once they built it. Actually, they thought it was going to be, they designed something, but they didn't quite anticipate how good it was going to be for reusing. So they've got these really good sets, but maybe they found that doing certain things was going to cost too much money. It's hard to say. I think it is a bit of a shame. See,
the more Star Trek changes, the more it stays the same.
Well, there you go. Like you said earlier, spamming a can. But yeah, who knows on that side of things. It is a bit of a shame that we haven't got that. I think I liked the fact Seven seemed really scared of it all, and I suppose it's interesting how she takes it in her stride. Though she allows herself to be hooked up with the whole the sequence of "We Are the Borg" coming through her was very cool. I have to say that was a goosebumps moment. But it's interesting how I found the whole Annika has got more work to do thing interesting, because it almost felt like the Borg had let her go in some sense. For now, it was like she wasn't sure if she was going to want to detach and. I don't know, when you think about all the episodes of Voyager where she was having to try and overcome her, connection to the Borg and her attachment to the Borg, to be sort of jacked up into it and then pulled out. I wonder if she's got to a point now where she's able to cope more with the idea of this, having spent so many years deborged. It's hard to say, but it's fascinating to see these things.
Yeah, and she seems very much aware of, that was always the thing with me of, at the beginning of, how well do they know about this Borg cube? But it seems all kind of pretty common knowledge. You have them talking about, there's this treaty, and then as soon as Seven arrives going, where's Hugh? It seems like it's such a... I would love to know. I'm sure the next book will be something along this about, how this all unfolded and the Federation reaction. And it seems that, these people are aware of this as a cube, and there's been a lot of consequences of it in terms of these XBs being harvested on the ship, but then also out with. There seems to be still a lot of kind of elements out there where I'd love to know what is people's proper involvement and awareness of it, and how huge an impact did it have that there's basically a Borg cube, broken for now, but we've always know that it can regenerate, basically sort of just sitting close to Federation territory. There's a lot of kind of unknowns about that, and I don't expect that to be kind of answered in the next 2 hours. I expect that to be sort of the more supplementary materials. Yeah,
I agree. I found it almost... I have quite liked, in a way, the fact they have tried to keep a lot of that stuff in the background, and they've tried to sort of suggest things. Like you say, they've mentioned treaties. They've mentioned things like the Romulan Free State without going into any details, and you're left to sort of infer that the Empire collapsed when the supernova hit, and that the neutral zone felt collapsed as well, which, and if you read, like you say, supplementary material that isn't canon, but like the Last Best Hope, the Ian McCormack book, which we've discussed on this show, that explains, how the neutral zone essentially collapsed and why, and with the rescue effort and things like this. So it's the galactic map between Romulus and, what was Romulus? The Romulan Free State and the Federation is different. It seems like they are more allied as two nations. And that's the key thing. We haven't seen the Romulans that's the thing, partly. We haven't really seen the Romulans as such in this series. We've seen Romulans, most of them who seem to be under the control of Narissa and the Zat Vash on this cube. So it's unfair to almost say we've seen the Romulans, because we sort of haven't, in a way. So there is a lot, like you say, surrounding all this that is ambiguous, that it's like we're seeing a small part of the puzzle, and there's lots of things that presumably they've got in a big that big Bible they used to convince Patrick Stewart to do the show. That's like a whole book long. Presumably, it's all in there. And yeah, I kind of like the focused nature of the storytelling in a way. So I suppose it works both ways. But I would kind of like to know more about what the situation is with the Borg, actually, because obviously we get the use of a Borg transwarp conduit in this. So are the Borg still active? Are they just away? Did Voyager really do a lot of damage 20 years ago, or however long, 25 years ago, or however long it was now?
Yeah, and I suppose transwarp conduits kind of can survive an empire. I think of there was an alien species in season 6 of Voyager that you had these transwarp sort of conduits and so on, and and then they had sort of survived that species. So yeah, there's a lot. I think that's the element of, we kind of know where the Federation kind of is, the Romulans are to an extent, sort of this post-supernova, but so many of the other powers and players, we don't really know where they're at, and I suspect that'll be something perhaps more for season 2.
Maybe. I'm still sticking with the theory that we're going to see the Klingons in season 2 of Picard. That's where I think they're going to go next, but who knows? We'll have to wait and see in 2 weeks. But yeah, let's talk more about the La Sirena then on there, because obviously Picard and Soji are back on there now, and most of what happens on there really is an exploration of two things. Firstly, I suppose if you were to look at this in a sort of semi-character-centric episode, I suppose you could attribute this one to Rios in many ways. He, the whole term of broken pieces is how Raffi describes him in terms of the holograms, the EMH and the IMH and all these different things. And it is essentially his demons that we discover that link into the broader plot and everything like that. In a way, I have to say I wasn't expecting. I joked in previous episodes how I thought the whole Ibn Majid mystery of his captain who blew his brains out would absolutely be something we got in a tie-in novel, and that it would be a part of his backstory. I didn't think for a minute, Lee, that it would tie in to Soji, to the Destroyer, to the whole Bruce Maddox thing. That really did surprise me in this episode.
That's why these things can be sometimes joys to discuss. These podcasts can make fools of us all, can't
Oh, God, yeah.
It's one of those ones that you almost feel like going, well, this is my opinion, but I reserve my right to change my mind in 2 episodes or 3 episodes' time. And
definitely.
I didn't see this coming either. I thought, oh, right, that's something as well. But Rios has become sort of one of my standout new characters of this series so far. And to see all sort of the different holograms come together, it was a sort of real tour de force for Santiago Cabrera. And it's been, I think this is the first thing I've properly seen him in, and I want more of this guy. And we certainly got that in this episode, and I didn't see that kind of plot coming together like that, but the way it ties it all so well together, I was really impressed. And it's things like this where it gives you the confidence that these writers, there's been flaws and missteps, but they started this show with an idea and a clear arc of perhaps where it's going to go. And there's always things that can be up for grabs, but I think this character of Rios, it was clearly kind of marked out, and I thought it delivered in this episode. And he felt like the last character on this ship that we were to properly learn about, and it certainly delivered.
It really did. I think that I feel like, again, that a lot is revealed through backstory discussions, but I think the real core part of this that I think is a really great idea that has been really well executed are the holograms. Are the emergency holograms. I think, and the fact that, it was revealed that when he got on the La Sirena, he set the holograms to sort of self-scan accidentally, in air quotes, and it's to scan different aspects of his personality, put them into characters, and they've reflected his, you've got the sensitive you've got the nice Irish navigator, you've got the sort of haughty one who for hospitality, you've got the sort of the Scottish engineer, although I will come back to him in a minute because I want to ask you about that. But you've got all these different facets that we've seen many of them through the season so far, but actually using them in this episode as a means for Raffi to try and investigate not just Rios' psychology, but also tie into the conspiracy theorizing she's done and sort of put pieces together in terms of Soji and the backstory of the Ibn Majid. I thought that was really, really good. I think it's for start, it's the best use of Raffi I've seen yet on this show. And I think, even though I still think her character is cringe city often, I think she was really well utilised in this. And I thought the way that it integrates with the holograms was so good. And it's such a very simple idea, but I think Michael Chabon really well executed that.
Yeah, I think what I liked about Raffi as well is that we've sort of seen this little arc where, I think, what was it, a couple episodes ago, when she kind of got Picard onto the Borg cube, and, she's swigging the bottle, she does what's needed of her, and kind of people leave her be, for better or worse, really. And then in this episode, we start to see her becoming sort of the stronger figure, and that she's able to kind of reach out to Rios and help guide him through, and she can see sort of that she's been right for years about kind of what's been going on with the Federation, the Romulans, what happened on Mars, and sort of we've seen that kind of character click into gear. And what I like about this episode is that it feels like in Stardust Rag City, yeah, we see them as a team or, going on a mission. But it feels like they're becoming sort of that family now, that you can believe that they're going to want to stay with each other into that kind of second season, that these are broken and damaged people and will continue to be that way for a little while. But, Raffi is, helping Rios through, Picard is helping Jurati is helping Asha. It's really kind of exciting to see those things coming together, and that's why an episode I was like, oh, this is okay, and I was thinking in my back of my mind, I was like, oh, I've maybe drawn the short straw here for Make It So. There might not going to be the greatest amount to really dive into here, but then in a way we've got this episode where it's like, this feels like the start of something, and whether I'm being maybe an apologist or something like that, I feel like we've got a good Star Trek episode here, and showing that the Star Trek values that we'd expect in our characters.
No, I agree with that, and I think there is, like I say, in terms of I've said earlier, in terms of the character stuff, I think it's well done. I think you do get some really interesting, like you say, looking at values, because that's the whole thing with Rios, in that we find out ultimately that he's Commander Alonso Vandermeer, the captain, who we saw much like a father figure, killed himself after he was essentially tricked and blackmailed by Commodore O into murdering a version of Soji and a male version of Soji, like an android figure, a male android, who had hailed from this mysterious planet that they're heading to, in a first contact situation, and that he was told that the Ibn Majid would be destroyed, and that it was a big betrayal by Starfleet, and he killed himself because of that, because he couldn't potentially cope with what he'd done. And I think it's a really clever way to sort of tie it all together, I think, and in terms of getting to the core of that Rios, who, and we've said before on this podcast, Rios defied expectations. Everyone expected him to be this swaggering Han Solo, and he's actually been a very sort of introspective, angst-filled, a bit grumpy and gruff character, but really well played by Santiago Cabrera. Just the character of Rios is really well played, but then he's managed to have fun playing all these different holograms and imbuing all these different personalities. But I think the fact that Rios has spent years now grappling with what this, virtuous captain did, and it caused him to lose his Starfleet career as a result. He was a commander at the time, so he potentially would have been a captain of a Starfleet vessel as opposed to Captain Rios on the La Sirena. It's tragic, really, what's happened to him, and I thought it was really well put across as we finally realised that. He sort of crumbled into all these broken pieces because he saw the virtue of a man he respected and who he looked up to and he wanted essentially to be destroyed. And now he's going to find out that ultimately he didn't do a terrible thing because he lost his mind or he was a bad person. He did it because he was conned as part of this conspiracy. And Picard, who is essentially, Vandermeer to the max, his kind of great figure, who he can see that virtue in again, will help him discover that. And that's what you see in that final scene at the end as well, where Picard's talking about how Starfleet, Rios says, well, Starfleet didn't really, lose their virtue and all this. And he said, no, they did. They did, because they were afraid and they gave in to fear. I think that was all so well done, because it gets into the psychology of Rios. It ties it into Starfleet. It ties it into the mythology of the show. And yeah, it cuts to those Star Trek values. I was really impressed by how Michael Chabon tied all of this together.
There's something a bit more cohesive about this season of Star Trek Picard than Star Trek Discovery. I mean, I really enjoyed season 1 of Discovery, and season 2 I've not really gone back to. I thought it had some highs, but I thought it was quite middling, and I was frustrated with it. And with something like this, I can't wait to watch a weekly episode of Star Trek Picard. Even after I've maybe been a bit frustrated with an episode, I can't wait for the next one. But it just feels like this is like, it's got something like that. It's got 10 episodes where they clearly had goals, ambitions, they saw it through, and it's been distilled down to sort of the purest form. There's still things that we don't know. There's maybe been the odd element here wasted or not, but yeah, I just really like it. And I thought that conversation between Picard and Rios was a real season highlight. Just when you thought you couldn't get a better Picard, 1-to-1, like, it was so good. It was just good to see Picard being recognised by Clancy, being recognised by the people around him, and looking at himself, and even sort of Asha kind of reaching out and saying that, it sounded like you two loved each other. And that's a word that didn't get really banded around in, Star Trek The Next Generation very often. I mean, it's a very asexual show, really, The Next Generation. When, Picard, when Riker and Troy are your most kind of relationships or passionate, a bit of Worf as well. But otherwise, it was very kind of asexual. And I just loved that it makes you almost sit there and go, is The Next Generation actually just the Picard and Data love story? These two people that come together, and then, we see them kind of torn apart by Nemesis. That's the end. And then you have this show where basically Picard has come out of retirement, going around the galaxy, basically trying to find one little neuron of someone that he loved and loved him in his own way back. And that makes you kind of reconsider the Next Generation, its legacy. And I think Chabon, the people that are involved in making the show, Picard, Patrick Stewart as an executive producer, I think they've got a really unique way of looking at TNG, and it makes me kind of want to reevaluate it. I think there's a think piece there to be written by someone about The Next Generation as a love story of Data and Picard.
I love that. I've not heard that before, and I love that take, Lee. I think that's so good. That's so clever. Because if you think back to a lot of TNG, so many episodes didn't just feature Data, exploring his humanity, but so many of them were about those two, and about how they interacted with each other. There were so many more memorable episodes in a way of how Picard would, interact with Data than he did with Riker, for instance, who was his number one, there were quite a few with Worf as well, which is why I think, hopefully if we see Worf in this show, he will play a significant part, because I think there is still a really interesting potential for Picard to potentially get back involved in Klingon politics and Worf's life and things like that, because they had a bond in their own way. But it was different with Data, definitely, and I think it's a great take to think that there was a sort of platonic love between these two people, based on the fact, and there's that great line, isn't there, in this, where Picard sort of says, Data's emotional abilities were limited. We had that in common, and he's finally realised and faced up to the fact that he has been, while he is one of the great legends of Starfleet, one of the great captains of that century, he was also emotionally stunted for a long time. He never married, he never. He had relationships, obviously, and he had certain key relationships over time, and there's obviously the whole idea of him and Beverly, but that always felt very. That was always very chaste, and they did plant in the ideas that he's always had this unrequited love for Beverly Crusher, but it almost felt like they were only ever half-arsed about that. They never really wanted to go there properly, because I think they knew that if you did that story, it wouldn't really amount to a hill of beans, particularly. I don't know where you go with that then beyond there. So I think And I might have to eat my words if Beverly turns up in a future season and Picard, and they get them together and they do all that kind of thing. But I just don't see that happening. I think we might see Beverly, but I don't see that happening in that way. And I think it's more interesting to look at it, definitely, that it is about his love for Data, and now he's got having lost him and having spent all these years mourning him, finding him again in some way in Soji, or all of these androids, however many there are. Yeah, is him rediscovering that. That is so good. That is so good, Lee. You've hit something. You've got some in there.
I look forward to you expanding upon it even better than that in sort of cultural conversation. But I that's what Star Trek's always done. Like you highlighted there, like the relationships between characters, apart from let's say, Worf and Dax and so on. That was a bit pantomime at points, but I thought it was a really good relationship. It's always often been about the men, the relationships between the men, whether it's Spock and Kirk and Data and Picard. Those relationships are sometimes those are the best ones, and they seem, whether that's always often been the lack of female writers that kind of historically through Star Trek, yes, there has been some, but not enough perhaps to influence the relationships that sometimes these men struggle to, properly develop relationships between men and women, but could actually talk about how much they loved another man or admired a fellow professional. You see it so many times in these Enterprise behind the scenes. There's Rick Berman and Brannon Backer. They've got such a strong relationship together. Then you see that, What We Left Behind, this all-male writing room that have got such a strong bond. And you can imagine on Next Generation, your Michael Pillars, everyone always says, we loved Michael Pillar, he was our teacher, he guided us, how they talk about them. These were the people that were clearly perhaps writing from what they were experiencing in their professional relationships, that maybe just didn't have the time for, women in their lives, or could articulate how they felt perhaps about the opposite sex. I don't know.
That's really interesting. Yeah, again, how to look at that. And that's why it's been, I suppose, a different sort of shade of it with someone so influential as Kirsten Beyer on this show, building it from the ground up and looking at it and trying to create these strong female characters, because much as I don't always necessarily think the writing is there on Picard for all of the characters, I think they have intentionally created strong female roles in this show particularly. You only have to look at the backstory of someone like Raffi and the way she's been constructed, and even Jurati, who's now been revealed as this complicated, a bit unhinged herself kind of character, who everyone at the beginning thought was going to be the kooky sort of comedy, character in a way, the kooky girl who comes along for the ride. She's actually turned out to be a little bit sort of psychotic and sort of, hooked into this, conspiracy with O and actually killed a man and things like that. So it's sort of taken some of these characters, in a direct. And then you have Seven coming back, who's very layered herself and has had a really interesting backstory between Voyager and now. So I like the fact that Picard's put a different shade on these female characters as well as the male ones. But and that's what I say. I think Raffi is really well used here. I like the fact that there are certain things with her that she manages to piece together talking to these holograms, like how she realises that the mysterious conclave of 8, which she talked about earlier in the season, which she thought was potentially this group, this shadowy conspiracy sort of syndicate-style group, is actually the planets in that system. And that's a nice inversion of what we were all expecting. We were all expecting maybe this conclave of 8 was going to be the Zat Vash, or it was going to be this shady group within Starfleet, or who knows. But no, actually, it's just planets. It's part of this octenary, planetary system. And it's little things like that are really good, because it's also allowing her to start putting some of her obsessions and demons to rest as she realises that she was validated, in that her conspiracy theories were validated, that she was right, in many ways about what kind of destroyed her mental health and sent her into drugs and all this kind of thing. And I think it's good. I think this episode does go some way to sort of starting to put them all, well, not to be too cliche, but put them back together. These characters, these broken characters. Even by the end, Jurati's talking about how she wants to find redemption especially after she speaks to Soji and she sees the beauty in Soji as a creation. She sees what Maddox would have seen in many ways. How she is this blend of humanity and machine in many ways, even if Soji doesn't really realise that herself. So it's starting to put the pieces of these people back together, and I think this does that. And the more I think about it, and the more we talk about it, Lee, the more I see that actually in the writing.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes it sort of quite exciting as well. That in Star Trek: The Next Generation, in particular, very few of these characters ever exhibited any sort of flaws and so on. And you can imagine, Agnes Jurati is maybe some of us where we were watching perhaps shows like Deep Space Nine and so on, where the characters start to become flawed and we get excited about, a flawed, Federation and a universe. And, that kind of comes up in Asha, that's what makes things interesting, is the flaws in characters, whether it's just something as little as a toe or something like that. That's what ultimately engages in things and makes something feel fully real. You have something that is completely perfect. It's not always going to be an engaging character or drama. But if you have those flaws in there, it drags you in. And I thought I could feel that excitement in Jurati, and that, again, you were saying it, these characters are starting to heal, and I think they're going to have quite the romp together as they kind of get towards the end. Yeah,
hopefully what would be nice is if presumably these characters all do stay together in some way, whether it's in a continuing plot line we have here or in a new story in season 2, and we've got the last Sirena and all this kind of thing. If they do, then it would be nice to see them be able to find a bit more levity, a little bit more happiness, a little bit more, recovery, as it goes on. Because this series they are very broken. It has been quite dark. So I think it would be nice to see them be able to see the show, be able to put them in different roles, in different places, in different ways, and hopefully the groundwork done here will be able to facilitate that in a nice way. And yeah, obviously, it just all builds up to the end. It's one of those episodes where, because by definition it has these core conversations, these core revelations, it doesn't really have, in the same way, a plot that is full of incident, I suppose. So when you get to the end, it is essentially that they're on their way to this planet, and after Soji realises that, originally they're supposed to be going to Deep Space 12 so they can drop Jurati off and, with the authorities. And that Soji realises that everything that's going on, and she tries to take the ship to go off to this planet. And they all and Picard nicely, in that nice moment, says, we've done it my way, we've done it your way, let's give her a chance. Let's let her lead this in a way. And then they head off, don't they, to this planet. It does have that great moment, actually, doesn't it, towards the end, where Picard sits in the chair, he's prepared to start flying the ship himself, and he goes, I don't know how this works. That got a big laugh from me, because it's a great acknowledgement of how he doesn't really. He is a bit out of time, Now they've all got these holographic screens, and they're playing with things in the air. In his day, it was a little few buttons on his chair, wasn't it, that he'd tap, in his little keypad, or they'd have the LCARS sort of thing on the screens. It is a nice little touch to sort of suggest that he is a man out of time. I loved that. I thought that was a great little moment.
I love those little moments that have been scattered through this series of Picard finding his place as part of a crew where he isn't the captain, he isn't the most qualified at what he does. I've enjoyed that, even when he sort of looks at, what chair am I meant to sit in? And I just like seeing Picard sometimes just off center, sat on that little bridge or sort of pilot area and stuff. It's just things like that. It would have been so easy. I think we probably all expected, for the most part, that when there was going to be a Picard TV show, it'd be like, he's going to be an admiral, kind of going around doing space diplomacy. Whereas something like this is all the more interesting and kind of rewarding to see someone trying to get back to what they were, but in sort of a different world. Kind of, we always saw what I like when I think about it, especially Stardust Rag City, is that you see Picard not used to arriving at a planet and there's the pop-up screens or all these sorts of things, or what's life like when you're on a ship that isn't the Galaxy class ship with all the science and the team behind you, when you've got to actually use your wits and wills perhaps a bit more than having the best and brightest around you. Those have always been the little moments when they happen, of Picard being out of time and space, that have always been the most rewarding for me with Picard.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the show has been sort of perhaps unfairly labelled as, Star Trek meets Firefly, over the course of this series, and I think that is a little bit unfair, because I think one of the things I like about this new era, even though I don't always love the structure and the way they tell their stories, or even I don't necessarily think the writing is always that great, I like the fact they're trying to come at the Star Trek universe from a different angle, but an angle that's always been there. We've always had these kind of, more mercenary sort of crews. We've always had the idea that the Star Trek universe is bigger than just the Starfleet and the Federation. It's just we've never really looked at it from that angle before. And Discovery itself, even though it's obviously gone into different sort of areas with everything, that still is from a Starfleet sort of mindset, paradigm, whereas Picard fundamentally barely has any Starfleet in it. It is the odd character here and there, the odd mention, like of his crew, his old academy mate, Marta Batanides, who we saw in Tapestry way back when. Mentions of like the USS Reliant when he's an ensign, little things like that, and the Ibn Majid and all this kind of stuff. It's been a very sort of non-Starfleet sort of directed, by necessity in many ways, show. And I think that has alienated some people, but I think it does... you're right, it does make Picard more interesting. It does make his journey more interesting, because they could have easily had him be an ambassador or be an admiral, or just have him be the Federation president. I remember when we first heard that this was going back, I remember commenting and saying, oh, maybe he'll be like an Obama in a Trumpian world, and he'll be a president who's trying to be a good man within some, and that would have been okay. That would have been fine. But it's better if he's on his downers and he's trying to rediscover who he is, and his place in the world. And I think it's done that really well. It has done that really well, even if I think at times he's a bit too just reactive than being dynamic. And I think he sort of sometimes Picard isn't driving the story in the way that would be nice for him to do. He's more just reacting to everything else going on around him. There are some aspects of this that you don't even need him in, and I don't know if that's always something I like, but at the same time, I think by and large, the path he's had so far has been a good one.
Yeah, and it's been one that's been exciting to go, and see where we need kind of the Star Trek values in the world right now. And I think when you hear what Picard says to these characters, how he views the Federation, it's impossible not to draw parallels with the Trumps, the Brexits, everything that's going on in the world. And it's just the simple things where you go and go, yeah, that's nice, that's good to hear, and it's that wisdom. And how many TV shows really are about sort of 70 plus men that have something to say in the world, and that have kind of, we sometimes, for better or worse, and I know I'm certainly guilty of it, seem to write off the older generation of they've had their time, look what they've done, frustrated with their presence in the world. And that's what people are saying to Picard often, all the time. You failed, you've done this, there's an episode where he just seems to piss everyone off one after another. Yeah. And it's just like, but he's continues to sort of show that he does have something to bring to the table. And all those one-to-ones, it's not always just about being able to, make first contact with new civilizations. It's sometimes being able to pass on that kind of hand round the shoulder, reassure people and kind of help bring people up. And that's what it's all about sometimes. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, definitely. So yeah, the episode ends with everyone together on the La Sirena heading for this planet, and they head into the transwarp conduit, and they're being followed, presumably by Narek, who we didn't see in this episode, and we barely saw him in the last one either, so presumably he's going to have a fair bit to do in the last two episodes as he re-finds Soji again, and they have a big confrontation, no doubt. So yeah, it's queuing up for a if you look at the trailer for next week, and I won't spoil anything, it certainly looks like it's going to be quite action packed. So yeah, Broken Pieces is an important, I suppose, part one of a 3-part finale in a way. So should we have a look at the mailbag then, Lee, and dig into what some of the fans and listeners have been saying about this?
Yeah, episode? Absolutely. Great to hear what they say.
So, thanks to everyone in the Make It So Star Trek podcast fan group for chipping in with your thoughts, as ever. Do keep those coming, even if I haven't read them out on here. But yeah, Oz Trekkie says, this episode finally tied all the story lines together, and we finally know who's who and all their motivations. Loved Seven in this episode, and whoever thought we'd feel sorry for Borg sucked out into space. It's true, actually. It was a moment where she goes, no! And you do think, those poor Borg drones. What a shame. That just shows to me just how differently they've approached the Borg. Like we talked about earlier. I mean, who'd have thought that you would feel a moment of, oh no, because they were supposed to be, Hugh was doing good work trying to save them, and if that was able to carry on, those people might actually have been deborged and been able to get their lives back. So it's quite tragic in a way. Yeah,
it is it's pretty much a mass genocide on that scale.
He says Picard scenes were great. He's getting back to his old self again. Can't wait to see how it all ends. I think we all agree with that, Oz. Definitely, thank you. Laura Redinbus says, I liked it a lot. I felt like the episode might have been longer, but they trimmed scenes to make it faster paced. I can buy that. Well, that's interesting because it's still 55 minutes long. The last few episodes have been longer than, earlier on in the season, they were all running around 45 minutes, but Nepenthe was nearly an hour. This has been 55. So, yeah, that's an interesting take, actually. I can buy that once the crew combined, they all knew the story fleshed out. They knew the story fleshed out, especially since Raffi has been poking around in some of this for decades. I actually yelled no at my TV when the Romulans breached the cube to hurl the drones into space. I thought Seven referring to herself by her human birth name was to show the audience that she was successful at holding on to her individuality and was truly separating from the mini hive. What's interesting about that is that I interpreted the Annika reference as being from the Borg and not actually being Seven. But maybe she saw that differently. So what do you reckon? Do you think that was the Borg talking, or Seven's fighting her way out of that?
I thought it was the Borg talking, but maybe I need to reevaluate and have a look back.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. She carries on saying, I don't want season 1 to end. I also thought Picard's talk with Rios was most like the old captain we know and love. Yeah, I think we've said that. The humour of him cracking his knuckles in preparation for piloting the ship only to realise he can't reminded me of 11001001 when he has to pilot the Enterprise back to space dock. Oh, that's an old callback. I haven't watched that one in years. Is that the Binars? The one with the Binars?
Yeah, it's they've got that. They've nailed it.
Yeah. So that's a great callback, yeah. So, yeah, Colleen Costello says, she's got 9 points. They're not too long, so she's got some good ones there. So, number 1, your little backstory just made me like you even less, Narissa. I hope Elnor cuts your head off. Well, he might do, yeah. It would give Elnor something to do, at least. I mean, what do you make of that character, Lee? Because I found him to be really strange in some ways.
I'm amused by him, but I think we're due this substance episode with him soon enough, and I've enjoyed the double. He plays well off other characters. I just really want to dive into a little bit more of him, so I'd like to see him kind of fleshed out, like the same as we saw Rios, but I think at this rate it'll probably be early season 2.
Yeah, I would agree with that, yeah. Number 2, she says, leave it to the Romulans to take some rando prophecy and run to the edge of sanity with it. That's true. Number 3, Elnor hugging Seven after she rescued him just warmed the cockles of my cold, dead heart. That was a nice touch. I agree with that. Admiral Clancy really loves throwing the F-bomb at Picard, and the look on his face was priceless. Just quickly, what do you make of this? Because this has caused some conversation again. Because obviously in Maps and Legends in episode 2, we had her say, your sheer fucking hubris. And now she tells him to shut the fuck up. Literally tells him to shut the fuck up. I mean, I am admittedly on the train of, while I don't mind swearing in Star Trek, I don't know if most of these F-bombs, if not all of them, have really been needed. What do you think? Do you mind that? Do you think that they are earned? Do you think that they are good in a comedic sense or in a shock sense? What's your take on particularly Clancy's F-bombs?
I think I had recently finished the audiobook of The Last Best Hope, and it feels that when the curse words come from Clancy, it is very much fitting in with sort of the supplement materials in this. And no, I enjoy it. I enjoy swearing. I have no real issue with it, to be honest with you. Could it be without it? Yeah. But do I have any issues with it? Not overly. I think there've been some kind of standout moments, and just, you know, Picard is our hero, we idolise him, but to see someone with such contempt for him sometimes, and even in his best moments of like, shut the fuck up, or whatever she said and stuff, it's like taking like the shut up Wesley to the PG-13 extreme. Like, I prefer it to stuff like this, where it's like, you know, I think people have sometimes said that, you know, Star Trek has no, you know, business with swearing, but sometimes I think it's really, you know, nailed the moment. You know, you think of like, Kirk, you Klingon bastards, you killed my son. That's a hell of a moment. You know, it doesn't really necessarily pack the same punch, but it certainly stands out more than it did in Discovery, and it seems more fitting with the character.
Yeah, I would say, I'd agree, really. And like you say, I think, look, if you read The Last Best Hope and you treat that as canon, I think it does give you extra shades to their relationship, because there is a lot more with Picard and Clancy going back to the Romulan rescue event. I liked the one in Maps and Legends more than this. I think this was admittedly more played for comedy, because in Maps and Legends, it's a bit of a, she's angry, you know, she's basically telling him to fuck off, you know, whereas in this, he's ranting, and he is ranting at her. He's going, if you don't do this, then so she's basically, it's like she's telling off her grumpy old dad, saying, shut up, right? I'm going to help you. So it's more, it is more played for comedy. But I think I liked the earlier one, because I think it was a bit of a shock punch value, and it was. But I knew they'd bring Clancy back eventually, and I quite like the fact that she is now willing to help, and it does reinforce the idea that Starfleet are not the bad guys. The Federation are not the bad guys. Yes, they've been infiltrated by O, but Clancy's not a bad guy. She's just a pragmatist, and she is part of a Federation and a Starfleet that have become a bit more insular, and they aren't quite the same as they were. And it would be lovely if we had a 24th century show that gets a bit more into the Starfleet of this age and explores a bit more of that as well. We might do one day, who knows? But I think she will. What I worry is that she will get a lot of hate Clancy, and I think she's a more interesting character than the two scenes we've seen her in allow her to be, you know? Yeah,
I think the book really, you know, fleshed her out as a character. And I like The Last Best Hope, and I really enjoyed your interview with Una McCormack. Like, that is the first Star Trek fiction book I've read in maybe 15, 20 years. I traditionally read the Trek non-fiction or analysis on Trek. Like, I know you're doing something like that at the moment yourself. Like, that's the stuff I enjoy, and looking at the work. And I thought it was a fantastic read, and it really kind of brought me into the character of Clancy. And yeah, I'd love to see more of her, but the book has certainly whetted my appetite for more.
Yeah, 100%. That book is terrific, definitely, as we've said in the show. Okay, so point 5 from Colleen. Then all the Borg get jettisoned into space. Lame. She wasn't a fan of that one. Raffi playing 20 questions with the Rios holograms was great. Honestly, that girl deserves the Fox Mulder Award for tenacity. Nice little X-Files reference there. Well done. Number 7, if this were Murder, She Wrote, Elnor would be the killer, because he doesn't seem to have fuck all else to do. So far, he's like a fan fiction dream come true. Nothing but wasted potential. As we've said, I think they will in season 2, because I think he will stick around. A few people have suggested maybe he'll go off with 7 and become a Fenris Ranger, but I get the feeling that they'll keep him around. So, because I think there is a good character there, so we'll see. Let's give him time. Number 8, Picard attempted to fly La Sirena was like watching my dad with his smartphone. Yeah. Number 9, I can't wait to get a load of this android planet. She says, I did enjoy the episode for the most part, and it was satisfying to finally have all the pieces fit together, but I was hoping for more from the artifact scenes, and I think they could have condensed Rios' meltdown a touch. Watching him drink and dig through that trunk for so long was frustrating, and it made me antsy for them to move it along. I think that's fair enough. I think you could have maybe trimmed a little bit of this stuff. But then at the same time, you know, it does give you some nice digs into character. So, yeah, it's a mixed bag. But great thoughts there, Colleen. Thank you. And finally, our guest from last week, Craig McKenzie, said, not a fan of this episode, waiting so long for the mystery of the Zat Vash to be answered, only to have it basically be the plot to Mass Effect or Battlestar Galactica with nothing interesting added to it was highly disappointing, and having O, as well as Narissa, be behind the attack on Mars just makes the universe feel small. Very contrary opinion there from Craig. What do you think? I mean, I haven't played Mass Effect, so I don't know essentially what he's referring to. But I get, obviously, the Battlestar Galactica link there, because, you know, if anyone knows the story of that with the Cylons and and everything like that, which is a terrific show. But, I mean, obviously he's not a fan. I'd say we like this more than he does. What do you think about that point about the universe feeling small? Do you feel that revelation does do that? It does condense it a bit too much and it deserved to be something different or bigger, potentially?
Me and Craig, I know Craig well, and we don't often sync up in terms of a fellow Edinburgh boy as well. You know, he's got
sure.
really, really good podcasts and fantastic
he's great.
writer. I mean, I often disagree with him, but I certainly would never kind of bet against him in terms of articulating his points. But for me, that it doesn't necessarily make it small, because what I like is that it ties in with the story that's been presented out there. Sometimes I think with these shows where you're like, oh, I wonder what the twist thing with the Mars thing will be, and like, as we kind of touched on earlier, you could bring something out of nowhere, like, oh my god, that's a shock, or you could just like carefully plan it out and go, well, that makes sense. Like, they've clearly kind of written it out, presented it. It makes sense. Yeah, that's why it would happen. Like, Star Trek has never necessarily been a show of like, right, here's a big twist and shock of like, you never saw this coming. Yeah, we have the odd cliffhanger, but it's never been about something like just been thrown into the mix like that. So yeah, I had zero kind of issues with it being that, because that is what they presented at the beginning, and it's never been a like, we need to get to the bottom of the mystery of who kind of did it on Mars and stuff like that. Like, we're able to see what's in front of us and it makes sense. You know, think of like the X-Files, for example. We had a lot of kind of left field choices, but sometimes the most rewarding things in the X-Files was like, yeah, of course it's these characters that we have watched unfold over several different episodes that have clearly telegraphed and been well written enough to kind of articulate they were the ones behind it. We now know why they did it. It kind of makes sense, as opposed to something from left field and then you kind of have to then spend the next few episodes either explaining or backtracking on. So yeah, I can see why some people would maybe have expected something more. I thought it made perfect sense within the Picard canon that we got and within these 10 episodes.
Yeah, I would say I agree, I have to say. Speaking of small universes, Craig says, how about Rios having a major connection to the main plot? What a coincidence that was, and why was it needed? We've talked about this before. I don't suppose it was needed, but I think it does. I quite liked how it factored in, I have to say, as we've said, and I think it does allow for a little bit. I suppose in some ways, if it had all been completely different and separate, and again, admittedly, it could have been a future plot line. It could have been a season 2 plot line where we find out what the Ibn Majid thing was about and it ties into something in the future. That absolutely could have been the case. Didn't have to be part of this, but it does allow everything to sort of tie up together. So I think in some ways that was a good choice, and it, like we've said, it certainly threw us for a loop. So yeah, again, I can see his point though. I do see his point there. 7 being on the Borg cube, interfacing with Borg technology after successfully escaping them, had so much potential to enrich her character, but instead went nowhere. I would say give that time, maybe. I think that the nowhere might be next week and the week after. But we'll have to see with that. Some individual scenes were good, like Picard talking to Soji about data and Jurati interacting with Soji, even if Jurati is poorly served as a character. Again, we've said similar, really. I will say about Jurati that I feel like she's not quite what I thought she would be, and not necessarily in a good way. I don't know if I love the choices that have been made with her. I mean, I personally think that she will die before the end of this season. I think this is heading for a redemption sacrifice. You know, she was supposed to go and give herself up to DS-12. That's not happening now. She's heading for a planet where something's going to go down. I could well imagine her giving her life as redemption to save Soji.
I could see her more being sort of a scientist in the field, a sort of Jane Goodall kind of character, that this is something that she has dreamed of and never imagined was possible until Picard came knocking on her door in episode 1. So I could see her staying behind and being with these kind of androids and, you know, writing the book really on this, you know, society that no one has seen. And I really want to know who the brother is. I think that could be an interesting one as well. So yeah, I think we're going to see, instead of, you know, it could be a Dr. Jane Goodall of androids.
Is the brother going to be Data? Is the brother going to be Brent Spiner? Is he going to look like Data? You know, I mean, maybe that's just too much. Maybe it could be it could be Brent Spiner playing a de-aged character.
Or Brent Spiner being Brent Spiner. You know how hard it was for them to get him to look young. I wonder if it will be one of those ones that could be like sort of a Brent Spiner lookalike.
Yeah, it could be. It could be. It wouldn't surprise me, actually. So, yeah, but we'll find out, I guess, next week or the week after. Finally, big concern going into the final episodes is that the show will double down on the nonsense and lose the heart. This episode basically does that, which could be an unfortunate sign of things to come. Well, we'll see. I mean, we'll see. I don't think Craig is particularly thinking the finale is going to be all that. So I kind of hope it will be. But again, you know, I understand his points. I do understand his points, and I think we'll have to see. Like we've said from the very beginning of this episode, a lot's going to hinge on the next 2 weeks. So we'll see. We will see. So yeah, that's all the fan feedback for now. Thank you guys for those of you who've watched it and have managed to chip in and with what you think. And yeah, it's been really good to hear from you. I have got one last question for you though, Lee, and I meant to bring it up earlier. Santiago Cabrera's Scottish accent. How obviously this is a nod, of course, to Scotty, this character, I imagine. But how good is it? Or how much work do you think he needs to do?
It's decent. It's one of these ones that I often find that when some certain actors do voices, they do Scotland as opposed to perhaps regional. It'd be the same as you know it's like yourself as an Englishman. How many times do you hear someone maybe do the Brummie accent or the Mancunian accent, or just like, I am just a generic English person that you cannot place. So yeah, it was fine. The words were okay and stuff like that. I don't know where in Scotland he's necessarily going to be from. I'm sure that will be added to Memory Alpha in good time. But yeah, it was an amusing one. As soon as it happened, I was like, yes, this is aligned for me to come on to this episode of Make It So.
So yeah, absolutely, yeah. It was fun. It was fun to have a little Scotty nod in there, definitely. And it's been fun to speak to you, Lee, about this. Thank you so much for coming on Make It So.
No, pleasure.
On this episode. It'd be great to have you back, hopefully, one day for a future episode of another season of Star Trek Picard, or, you know, maybe some of the other Star Trek series we're going to do. So until that day comes, because you're a big podcaster yourself, you've got some fantastic projects going on and various other things, why don't you point people towards where they can find you and, you know, give them a little taste of what you're up to?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at @LeeHutchison_, and I do 2 podcasts. I do Filibuster, which is a general kind of movie and culture podcast. I recently I've kind of had a few Star Trek connections in the past, sort of few episodes. I recently just interviewed Simon Pegg at the Glasgow Film Festival.
Amazing.
Unfortunately, Star Trek questions were banned, as were things about Mission Impossible and so on. So I didn't manage to get one in there. But I also interviewed recently the cast of Star Trek Picard on the red carpet. The white carpet for the UK premiere, which was an absolute surreal moment. And so that's kind of Filibuster. And then I also do something called the A24 Project. So, you know, there's so many great shows out like yourself that cover sort of like the X-Files, Star Trek, and so on like that. So I'm kind of out there in my own little corner, maybe kind of looking at sort of the indie film kind of scene and so on, and cover films like Green Room, Lady Bird, and so on that have been produced by A24, and we try and interview the talent involved behind the scenes. So it would be good to maybe get Patrick Stewart on one day to talk about Green Room. So that would be a treat. So yeah, we're kind of out there doing our own thing, so kind of covering both ends of the film and TV spectrum.
You get some fantastic guests on the A24 project as well. When I see you post things, I'm like, how has he got like the lead star in that film or the director of that movie? You know, you do really well with that podcast there.
I think it's like probably what you've probably find. See, when you do a show, say like the X-Files one, for example, when you do like a niche show, you can go to people like, oh, we had such on from this show, would you like to come on? And then it just can sometimes kind of roll from there.
Yeah.
And, you know, sometimes attending film festivals and so on, you can always pick up a few more. So yeah, it's kind of a treat. So we've kind of got plenty more on the horizon. So yeah, it's always good to find people listening and checking us out.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great podcast. So, you know, make sure you listen, guys. It's really good. And the films themselves, as you've mentioned, a few of them are always worth watching. So yeah, definitely check that out. We will, of course, be back to cover the last 2 episodes of Star Trek Picard over the next couple of weeks. I won't be back for the finale. I'm turning it back over once he's escaped from the Bajoran wormhole. Kurt will be back for... we've got 2 more guests coming in for the 2-part finale to finish off the season. So he's going to be back with you to take you through that. And then he and I will return to come together for our roundup episode in early April, in which we'll talk about Picard as a whole and maybe do some theorising and, see where the land lies for season 2, and also talk to you a little bit about what we're going to do later on to keep Make It So going throughout the year and everything like that. So thanks everyone for listening. Let's fire up the engines, hit that transwarp conduit, and engage. Previously on the We Made This network. Observing the pattern.
See, I can't really belong to the X-Files because until this year I had not seen the X-Files.
Okay.
And it's because my dad got my mum the box set, and it's so while I was studying, because I've just wrapped up my masters, that as I was studying and doing everything, they'd always have it on in the background.
Okay.
And so I'd catch episodes, and then I fully watched an episode that I'd heard about called The Modern Prometheus, or The Postmodern Prometheus, which is the black and white episode, and it still has one of the best endings. I know it's very
a very good episode.
Yeah. Oh, it's the happiest happy ending, and it actually made me like Cher, which is a bit of a feat.
Pick a disc.
And I think what happened was that a lot of the majority of the electronic stuff was done by Tom Morello. He sent it across, and I think that Gibbard would overdub the guitars and the vocals onto it, and I think they would then mix and master it with, I think, Jenny Lewis from Rilo Kiley doing backing vocals, and any other instrumentalists. I can't remember off the top of my head who else was involved. I know that Jenny Lewis definitely was involved. And then
there is another female vocalist as well, but I can't remember.
Another Hollow Mine.
Without a mouse.
I don't think he's as good as Dennis Quaid.
No.
He's not charming.
No, Dennis Quaid has that likeability.
Yeah.
You can imagine him being a dad.
He has that, oh shucks, I've got a cowboy hat, I sort of don't know what I'm doing, but I'll bumble through it sort of charm.
Yeah.
Whereas this guy is just a bit slightly aggressive, I'd say.
He did have another child, but they're currently rolled up in a carpet in his cupboard.
Yeah.
Like, this is the kind of vibe he's giving off.
Check out all of these shows on the We Made This podcast network. Make It So, a Star Trek Picard podcast, was created and is produced and hosted by Tony Black and Kurt North. You can find the show on Twitter at Jean-Luc Podard and on Facebook in the Make It So, a Star Trek podcast fan group discussion group. Check out the We Made This network at We Made This Pod on Twitter and on Facebook by typing in We Made This, and you can find all of our shows on our website www.wemadethispod.com. Thanks for listening.